Hey everybody, Elizabeth Nader back with you, Jersey First TV, live tonight. I'm excited to bring you the founder of Jersey First, Rosemary Becchi, the founder of Save Jersey, Matt Rooney. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Great to be here.
We have a lot to talk about. The primaries Tuesday night, so many things going on, and the two of you have so many insights to share with us. So let's start with the biggest, most obvious thing, which is the gubernatorial race. So Matt, did the numbers come out the way you predicted?
Well, it came in within the range that I was looking at. I thought that there was a chance that Phil Rizzo, because he didn't qualify for matching funds, was going to have trouble competing with Hirsch Singh. If that had happened and Rizzo only came in around 10%, you might have seen a much closer race. I don't think anyone who watches this stuff as obsessively as we do really thought that Jack was likely to lose. But a lot of people were saying, he might fall in the mid-40s. Maybe Singh gets into the 30s. That might have been problematic for Jack's ability, at least in the short term, to quickly unite the party. But that's not what happened. And I spoke to so many Save Jersey readers and just casual Republicans I know in the final days who seemed to break to Rizzo for one reason or another. So it was definitely best case scenario for Jack, but not really a surprise.
Yeah. Rosemary, was there anything that you were surprised about when you looked at the final results?
You know, what I thought was interesting to me was that when you added up Rizzo's numbers and Singh's numbers, it was significant, right? And so, there is a large contingency in the Republican Party that is very conservative. And that is the group that Jack is going to have to reach out to and unite with. And so it'll be, we'll see if that can be done.
So isn't it significant, Matt, that Jack didn't make it over 50%? Doesn't that give his team pause?
Well, I think that there's two levels of the discussion, right? On the one hand, does Jack have a decisive, commanding victory? Yes. I mean, he's the first. I'm going to make sure I get this correct because I already messed it up once today on a radio program. He is the first non-incumbent Republican in over 100 years to win all 21 counties. Mm-hmm. So you don't pull that off unless you have broad support. But the other end of it is, I don't disagree with you that this is not a 60, 70% victory. Jack definitely has a lot of Republicans that are now part of his coalition, he hopes, who loathe Phil Murphy for very good reason, want to see him defeated in November, but they're tired of choosing the lesser of two evils. So his job isn't just to disqualify Phil Murphy for these voters. They're already convinced the guy's a scumbag.
Right.
They need someone to be excited about. And that's what Jack's people need to do in the summer months. They need to get these folks excited.
Right. That's Go ahead, Rosemary.
I completely agree. It's really going to come down to the issues. First and foremost, education, getting our schools open and getting them to stay open, and the masks. It's going to be a big issue, and people are going to look for leadership on those issues.
One of the things that we had to deal with this whole primary was the Trump drum that was being constantly beaten by Singh and somewhat by Rizzo. When you look at those voters and what they decided, how they decided to land, do you think the Singh vote represents Trump, and do you think the Rizzo vote represents medical freedom, Matt? Which way do you think that goes?
I mean, there's probably something to be said for that. It's anecdotal, but it is true that many of the loudest medical freedom folks that I interact with on social media seem to skew Rizzo. Maybe that's because that's an ascendant movement. He's a fresh face, whereas a lot of the hardcore Trumpers, they're familiar with Hirsch because Hirsch has run a couple campaigns now. He's had, I think, 4 campaigns since 2017, running as a self-described MAGA Republican. My personal view, I've always believed that most MAGA voters, it's less about purity. It's more about somebody who's going to be an aggressive advocate that's not going to accept the left's narratives. I mean, Trump himself is not a pure conservative.
Right.
I was a Democrat for a long time before he was the Republican nominee in 2016. They want somebody that, like Trump in 2016, or Christie in 2009 is going to bully the people that have been bullying us in New Jersey for decades.
Yeah, I love the way you say that. And that's such a great way of describing the Trump movement. I wish more people would hear that and understand that. But Rosemary, he is a force to be reckoned with in some way. Either he's going to hurt Jack, not be a factor, help in the midterms. What are we going to do about the Trump issue in New Jersey?
No, I mean, I think he's very much has a presence. And I think that there are a lot of issues that people care about deeply, that he's fought for. And I do think, I agree with Matt, like, people are looking for leadership and somebody to stand up and say, hey, wait a minute, enough is enough. Like, we need leadership on these issues. And they're not looking for somebody to waffle on those issues. And again, as you know, Elizabeth, at Jersey First, we're, spending a lot of time working with a lot of parents on schools and getting the schools open. And people want, leadership on that issue. And they also want leadership on the mask issue. Right. Like, enough is enough. Our kids need to be in school. They need to be in school 5 days a week, and they need to be maskless. Mm-hmm. And so I think issues is where it's going to show up, is the Trump support. I really do, because people feel passionate about those issues.
And, it speaks to a little bit of the change in our party. Matt, civil liberties used to be the issue that Dems celebrated. They used to celebrate the working class, freedom. How does that look now? Are the Republicans really the party now of civil liberties and all of that?
I think that on paper they are, and in reality they can be, but they have to be willing to fight those battles. I think that one of the many things about this pandemic is that it's really brought into stark contrast some of the ways in which the Democrats are just completely full of it when they say that they're for the little man, they're for the small business, they're for Black and brown Americans who have traditionally faced hurdles in this country. What have they done for Americans who are trying to work their way up the ladder lately? And specifically here in New Jersey, the individuals, our families, our residents, our neighbors who've suffered most throughout this pandemic, they're the exact type of folks that Phil Murphy and his party are always telling us they're trying to help. No one has suffered more, for example, during this pandemic and this lockdown than a Black or brown single mother trying to work 1 or 2 jobs in order to keep her family going and keep her kids fed. She can't be home to make sure her kids are logging on to Zoom school. Right. So those kids fall between the cracks, despite the fact, by the way, that in some of these districts, because of the school funding formula, we're spending $20,000, $30,000 a year per kid. Where's that money going? Republicans need to talk about that, and they need to talk about it in aggressive, plain terms like we are right now. Stop using that Trenton speak. Relate to people on a one-on-one level, because they know that something instinctively is wrong. Yeah. Republicans just need to be willing to say it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Jersey First definitely is a group that's trying to push that issue. We're standing up. We are the voice for the voiceless, or the amplifying, really, those people that can't seem to get an audience. Rosemary, what have you seen really in the past 6 months that you guys have been focusing so much on in terms of the people that are hurting out there?
We've seen an array of issues and a lot of instances where people are hurting. Obviously, I talked about the schools and education, and that's an important issue, but also businesses, right? And being forced to be closed, and the Governor Murphy picking between big stores versus little stores, right? Little retailers, right, and things like that. And the little guy, the small business owner, really got hurt in New Jersey, and nobody was looking out for them. And then, so we've worked really hard on those issues. We still have soaring taxes, and our budget, it just makes me cringe. Like, we have got to get our spending under control. What we are doing to our future generations is crazy. And so that's still an important issue. And then you touched on it. There's a more general topic area in terms of supporting the community, supporting our vets, supporting our law enforcement, right? Protecting our civil liberties, protecting their medical freedoms. Those are all issues that as we relaunched Jersey First, people are talking about. And again, it kind of goes back to people want leadership on these issues, and they want somebody to stand up and fight for them.
Yeah, people are more involved, in my opinion, than they ever have been. I see a lot of people that don't want to be involved in politics, but they are because they feel no one is standing up for them. Matt, when you look at especially the gubernatorial race, this primary, how do you see the grassroots impact? I personally saw a lot more grassroots than I've ever seen before. Do you think that movement is changing? Do you think it's becoming a force to be reckoned with? How do you see grassroots going forward?
Well, I definitely think that one of the benefits of a contested primary is you have different candidates that respond to different areas of a party's base. There's this conventional wisdom that I don't think is that wise, that primaries aren't good for parties. Oh, we're going to waste money. We're going to beat each other up. No, it's a way to have a very difficult conversation. And we've all had these difficult conversations with our families, sometimes over Thanksgiving. Maybe you're trying to give advice to a niece or a nephew, or there's some other hot button issue. Sometimes you just got to have it out. So I think that definitely Phil Rizzo in particular, I thought did a particularly good job of energizing some people who maybe 2-3 years ago would have never thought to go to a political rally. So I really do hope that he and his followers engage with Jack and the folks that voted for him and begin to focus upon a common goal, which the common goal here is to wake up our fellow citizens in the state of New Jersey and show them that not only has Phil Murphy done a terrible job looking down his nose at us as the elitist that he is, but also, again, failing to help the people that he's constantly telling us he and his party give such a darn about. So many people are getting left behind in this state, and we're spending a lot of money for this failure. It's unacceptable.
It's unacceptable. And, we don't want to leave people behind from the primary either. So, you're saying, Matt, that you're hoping that the Rizzo supporters, the Singh supporters, get behind Jack. But Rosemary, what does Jack need to do to pull them in? These are people that are very committed to protecting their families, their children. They were excited by a lot of what those two candidates stood for. How does Jack need to pivot to get their excitement towards his campaign?
So I'm going to tell you about an event that I was at last week, and they had it was a group of patriots, and they had a chance to have each of the gubernatorial candidates come speak to them. And as a group, they voted in terms of who they liked. And it actually wasn't Jack. They had decided that they were going to get behind Rizzo. And so the conversation that I witnessed as I was listening to them, because I was their speaker, was then unfolded in, well, if Phil loses the primary, then we all have to get behind Jack. And for the next 45 minutes, they had a dialogue and a debate. And a lot of people felt strongly that just don't tell me what to do. Don't expect me to just fall in line. And it was really an interesting conversation to listen to. And I think that what they didn't hear is they wanted outreach. They wanted somebody to listen to them, to talk through the issues, and to understand the problems that they're all having and facing right now. And so I think that that's a big part of bringing everybody together, is really getting out. And that's where I think grassroots really matters. I think it's being out there. I think it's being in the diners. It's being on the street corner. It's being in people's front yard and having those conversations about what matters to them.
Absolutely. And so I think we all want to look forward to meetings this summer and hope that the candidates get together and discuss that, right? Bridges are built. Issues are focused on that matter to the grassroots. And, that's something that we hope for from the candidate. We do have a common goal, but we've got to get there with meaningful conversations. So let's switch from that, because we could spend an hour on that alone. And we give Jack a ton of free advice, right? Because he wants advice from us. So we'll just give him a ton of free advice. But let's talk about another really sort of the elephant in the corner, not so much in the corner, this primary, county lines. County lines really were a big deal this primary. Morris, it's their first season for it, the first primary for the line. We know two very specific issues, which would be Serena as well as Betty Lou. So Matt, talk about the county lines and how much impact you thought they had.
Well, I mean, we were talking before we came on tonight. One of the big questions for New Jersey politicos coming into this cycle was Morris County has its first ever line. What's this line going to be worth since it's brand new? Well, now we know. Betty Lou DeCroce, by the time all the money's totaled, outside groups and her campaign combined may have spent up to like $1 million for her to try to hold on to her assembly seat. And it looks like she was unsuccessful. If you want my 2 cents, my opinion on lines, I kind of come down in the middle. I don't think they're necessarily a bad thing because there's something to be said for giving a party the right and the ability to organize. You got to remember, you ever been to a county committee meeting? Most of the folks in there aren't fat cats in the back room smoking cigars and making shady deals. It's people from your community that get involved in the Republican Party. But I think what's more important is how that line is awarding its privilege of being in the column. Is it done democratically, or is it just selected by a couple folks who are making the decision for the rest of the party? And if you do it correctly, and I think Morris County did a decent job this year, the big fear that a lot of activists had about the line is it was actually going to hurt democracy. Well, you just had a very powerful incumbent who had a lot of money behind her lose her job. So apparently that wasn't a bar to democracy.
Good point. That's a good point, right? I mean, that was the big argument against the line was that it saves the incumbents and it protects them. And this actually went the other way. Rosemary, do you have a particular strong opinion about lines?
I do in Morris because I think you really saw grassroots at its best. You had candidates that got out there, that talked to the county committee folks and won them over, right? And that's how they won the line. And so, I subscribe, I'm with Matt, I do believe that it needs to occur in that way, that it needs to be a democratic process in terms of the line. You don't want one or two people just anointing people. That's not, to me, that's not what we want to see. That's not how we get the best candidates. But I do think that in the case of Morris, we had people that worked and they worked hard. And it's very unfortunate what happened. But the people, the challengers were out there and from the get-go.
There's a big difference between a chairman's line or a chairwoman's line and a committee person's line, right? Exactly. I mean, there's a difference in how it's done. I watched it firsthand. I'm on county committee in Morris. It was done well. Now it's a different situation with Serena. Matt, how do you see her particular situation related to the line? Do you think that was a democratic process?
Well, look, I mean, I think in that county, it has less to do with how democratic the process is and more to do with the power of the person at the top. Sean Golden, who's also an elected official in that county, has a very strong political organization. Yeah. So really, I think procedurally, it's less instructive as to how Serena lost her seat if you're to analyze that element of it, and more to just do with the fact, and this isn't a shot at Laura Ali, who's a very impressive lady. It's just Sean Golden's been around a lot longer, and he's much more influential at this point with a larger percentage of the delegates in Monmouth County. Also, I got to say this. I've known Serena for a number of years. I like her quite a bit. I also know Jerry and I know Vicki Flynn a little bit. I got to interview her at Save Jersey, and she's also an impressive candidate. So, I mean, I'm a little agnostic when it comes to some of this stuff. I'm a free market guy. I'm a conservative, and I don't apologize for it. So long as it isn't a couple guys in the back room with cigars making the decision, I say, let the cards fall where they may.
Power in the right hands, good power in the wrong hands is not. So it can change from time to time. Rosemary, do you see the line as something that can attract people to run for county committee? We have some of these counties where we have empty seats, like unbelievable numbers of empty seats. Does this not help really attract people who see that they can have major influence?
Absolutely. And again, as you know, what Jersey First is all about is the grassroots. And again, that's what we want. We want people to get involved. And it starts with getting involved with county committee.
Yeah.
It really does. And so I hope it encourages people and I hope it drives people to come out and say, hey, how do I get involved in this?
Yeah. Well, we are a bottom-up country, so there is a lot of power in county committee done right. So let's look at Senate and Assembly. Matt, did anything else stand out to you in this primary? And do you have any predictions that are a little more positive in what I'm reading for November regarding the balance of power in those two houses?
Well, look, I think outside of Betty Lou DeCroce's loss, there weren't any major surprises in the primary. I think if you asked the people to watch this stuff for a living, that's the only one where they might have told you, well, I think Betty Lou's going to hang on, probably on the strength of how much cash she was spending, but it just wasn't enough. As far as what it tells us about November, I'm hoping there's some early signs of at least the potential to energize the Republican base. I think there comes a point where both parties are hungry, and that's because they've been out of power long enough. Certainly we saw that with Democrats in 2018 and 2020. They were tired of being out of power, and they certainly took it out on the other party at the polls. I'm hopeful that Republicans in New Jersey are starting to feel the same way. And look, let's not forget, I mean, we are always in the avant-garde of whatever the next national movement is here in New Jersey. It doesn't always feel that way, but even though she's not my favorite person these days, Christine Todd Whitman, her victory in 93 preceded the Newt Gingrich Republican Revolution in 94. Chris Christie, he came a full year before the Tea Party Revolution. This is how it starts. And again, I think it's because here in New Jersey, the people that were voting in this Republican primary, they don't have to imagine what it's like to live in a socialist dystopia. They live this existence every single day. Overtaxation, overregulation, a governor, depending on which side of the bed he rolls out in the morning, whether your kid has to sweat in a mask all day. If that's not enough to motivate you, it's time to get a doctor to check your pulse.
Absolutely. Well, we should be motivated. Not only have we been looking out, as Senator Bateman said today, from the outside in for 15 months now, it's even worse now that the governor took his power grab and with the bill that passed last week. Rosemary, Republicans at this point, what are our chances of even seeing any little bit of change in power, considering all the things that have happened this year and that recent bill?
I think it's going to be very, very difficult to see any change in power. But what I'd like to see is us to make some incremental process. And I'd like to see us, seats where somebody's retiring, like Senator Bateman. I want to make sure that that Mike Pappas picks up that ball and runs with it. So those are ones that I certainly am going to spend some time and knock on doors and help out in that district. So I think we can make some good incremental changes and pick up some good races. We've got some great people that are going to be on the ballot in November. So, it's time to kind of rally behind them and really help out.
So we want, obviously, everyone to be excited about the elections. We want people to show up and vote. And it seems like an obvious thing for those of us that are in this all the time. But as you saw in Georgia, when people feel disenfranchised, when they think that there is too much fraud or that it's already rigged, they don't even show up. Matt, is there a risk if Jack doesn't excite the conservatives and he doesn't actually have the broad appeal? Do we have a risk here that they actually will exit the process?
Oh, absolutely. It's easy to forget, but Phil Murphy was elected in one of the lowest gubernatorial turnouts, if not the lowest in New Jersey history. Only something like 1 out of every 3 registered voters actually showed up and voted for governor in 2017, which when you think about the stakes even then, and that was before coronavirus and some of our more recent challenges. I mean, goodness gracious, how could you sit on the bench? But people did. And I'm maybe a little naive, but I don't think it's because people don't care. I think as you're kind of alluding to, Elizabeth, I think they've lost faith that things can actually change. I think in a lot of ways, Republican governors that have run and been successful in recent years promised to turn Trenton upside down. Some of them have arguably gotten turned upside down themselves. So Jack, I don't pretend to have all the answers. If he wants to call me, I'm happy to talk to him about it. But he's got to do something bold and early and dramatic to convince people he's different. Some of it may be policy based, and there's things that Rosemary and I would agree on. Like, how about calling to disband some Trenton departments? For so long, this Republican philosophy in this state, because we were so centered around winning some of the districts around Trenton, was don't tick off the state workers. Don't tick off the state workers. How about calling to get rid of some state departments? Someone who has spent their entire life and orients their entire vote every November about making sure they get a paycheck, we're probably not going to win them anyway. Right. But everyone else who's been negatively impacted by the virus, maybe it's their time that they're finally going to be willing to hear about how maybe we shouldn't have a Department of Community Affairs. I mean, it's in the title, Elizabeth. It's Community Affairs. What business does Trenton have having a department to police it? So big and bold. I think that's how he starts that conversation.
Well,
and I think people are going to be looking for that, Elizabeth. Yeah. People are going to be looking for that. Like, you know, Jack's background is he's an accountant. People want solutions. Like, what are you going to do when you have the pen? What's the first thing you're going to do? Right. And again, it goes to you can't. And as we've learned, you can't just lower taxes. You've got to cut the spending. It's the only way you get it done. And in this state, the spending is so out of control. It just needs to be reined in. And I think that's what people are looking for, is real solutions.
We need to cut the spending. We need to audit the budgets. And, you know, it would be nice if the Murphy administration would show up today when they're discussing the $11.5 billion budget. It's incredible to me at this point how their arrogance is just, it's beyond, right? Matt, it seems as though he has really just crowned himself. I mean, that's it. He's King Murphy. He will do what he wants. So we've borrowed money we don't need. We have debt service on that. Where does this end if we don't stop this?
Well, it ends in California. And look, I mean, the beauty of Phil Murphy and some of his ideological ilk is, I will give them this much. They're always telling you exactly what they're going to do. So many people I've encountered, and I live in a bluer part of New Jersey, are so surprised by how awful Murphy's been. And I tell them, he told you in 2017 that he wanted New Jersey to be California. Yes, have you visited California recently? The state that more than any other used to epitomize the American dream is now starting to resemble the third world in many substantive ways. It's disgusting. It's a disgrace. It's an un-American outcome. So, you know, ultimately here in New Jersey in 2021, we have to talk about this, but we also have to put things in moral terms. Because pivoting back to our other conversation for a second, speaking also as a millennial, we are conditioned to debt. We all grow up with these massive student loan obligations, and we're almost kind of told that that's what you need to just accept to get to the goal. Jack and Republican candidates need to begin to explain that, no, it doesn't need to be this way. There's a third option for you that doesn't end in California. And we gotta get off this train track that we're on right now, because if we don't, I think we're speeding towards the cliff at 90 miles per hour. Another 4 years of Phil Murphy, your only recourse might be to move to a southern state where the pizza tastes like ketchup on a cracker.
Yeah, well,
that's it.
That sounds so unattractive, Matt. But
it's not good.
It's not good. You made an incredible point. We are conditioned to debt. I mean, that is an incredible point. And, you know, the young people now Rosemary's built an incredible team of interns. I think they're starting to look at that. And COVID maybe took away a little bit of the attraction of, you know, getting $80,000 a year in debt at some school where you have to sit home with a mask on and you're not even there. It's taken the kind of, you know, the attraction away. But Rosemary, the young people that now we're talking the 20-somethings, right? No longer the millennials. What do they see? You talk to them all the time. You've built an incredible intern program there. What do they want from this government?
Yeah, and I am so proud of our internship program. We have 35 interns with us this summer, and they're working on everything from helping us file the lawsuits to reopen the schools, to helping with communications, to helping with Jersey First TV. And, you know, what they want is choices. And I think that's a lot of the conversation that goes on with them is choices. And I will tell you, going back to the kid being conditioned with debt, you know, I was one of those kids that borrowed $100,000 to go to school.
Mm.
And you know what? When you borrow that kind of money, you don't have a whole lot of choices, right?
Yep.
And so, you know, we need to teach kids and we need to help them understand. And I think they saw it through this pandemic that there is better. And life should be about choices, and they should have the right and the freedom to make those choices. That's what I want for them.
I think one of the most painful things that have happened to us in the last 15 months are the lack of choices that we have had. It's very un-American. It's very difficult to deal with, and it went on way too long. So now we do have choices. And Matt, we do need to excite people to get them involved. You know, they're not going to hear from us this summer. No one's going to care about who's running, whatever. They just want to have a Jersey summer, and God bless them. They deserve it, right? They deserve it. But come September, we've got to get back in front of them. Rosemary, what did you want to say?
Yeah, I do want to say though, when they go to the beach and they can't get the pizza and the pizza parlor isn't open and
Yeah.
things aren't open because of labor shortages,
That's right.
because of, you know, ridiculous regulations, because of all sorts of things. I hope people remember it and remember that in November.
And I would add, I was at one of my favorite beach towns last weekend. It was a great restaurant. I don't hold it against them, but it took forever to get just drinks, which, you know, that's rule number one of a restaurant. You got to at least make sure people have water and drinks, even if the food's taken a while. And then another one of my favorite restaurants, they didn't even open up this summer. So Rosemary's 100% correct. And it's going to be incumbent upon everyone who wants to see change in Trenton to keep beating that drum over the summer. Even if it's a low murmur, we can't stop.
Well, I think you're right in terms of people seeing the impact, right? So when they're sitting there waiting for their food or they can't get a table, even though they're all open because there are only 2 servers working, this is going to start to really come home to roost, to understand that we can't do this much damage for 15 months and expect there not to be a backlash. So Matt, as we wind this down, Murphy will, you know, predictably start to give us back more and more freedoms as we get closer to November. So he can say he kept us safe and then he made us free. How do we counter that?
How lovely of him, right? To give us back something he didn't have the right to take away to begin with. Well, look, I mean, not to be a downer because we're having fun tonight, but look, Governor Murphy is going to let you eventually have your kid take their mask off. Eventually, a couple more businesses may be able to reopen. But the ones that he destroyed, a third of our state's small businesses in 2020, he can't bring them back. He can't bring back your Korean War vet father or uncle that died in a nursing home because of his administration's order that directed that they have to accept COVID positive patients. Imagine that. Some of these guys survived World War II or Korea, but they couldn't survive Phil Murphy. Your kid's still going to be in therapy. And I know people that are in this situation this fall. So there's going to be lasting impacts. And I'm going to do something that my fellow conservatives are going to think is counterintuitive. Take a page from the book of Saul Alinsky. One of the common threads tonight we've been talking about, you need to personalize this stuff. If we just go out there and hit people with numbers, you have to have the numbers because you have to be able to back everything up with meat. But you got to talk about things in personal terms. That's what all the greats do. That's what Chris Christie did. That's what in 2009. That's what Ronald Reagan did in the 1980s. We need to continue to bring up these examples. And if I was Jack Ciattarelli, if he has the money, I would just be running ads constantly, interviewing people that lost loved ones, that lost a business, whose kids' childhood has been completely derailed by these anti-scientific orders. We know what we need to do. We just need candidates and campaigns and activists that can get it done.
It's amazing. And you're so right. Anytime you personalize data, it's got to be to the household, to the person, to the child, to the business, to the father that died and you couldn't even see him. It's not like we don't have a wealth of stories, unfortunately, for that. There's not one person in this state that couldn't say something to that effect. So Rosemary, I'm going to let you have the last word on how we move forward and how we win in November.
So my last word is everybody needs to sign the Jersey First pledge because you're going to pledge to put New Jersey first. I think it is so important that we all come together for that common goal. We've really got to put this state first and put the people of this state first. And that's what's going to drive us to success in November.
Absolutely. That's
Amen.
awesome. All right. Well, thanks, you guys. We have to do this again. It's great
Yes.
talking to both of you. So we will absolutely come back to our audience. I appreciate it. There are a lot of questions here, a lot of comments. You guys can go back later, find it all over Facebook if you can, and chat with the people. But thank you, Matt. Thank you, Rosemary. We appreciate you. And guys, we will see you next week. Go to jerseyfirst.org. Talk to you guys soon.